because of our Matthew 25 discernment process that's been going on since like, January, February of this year, something like that. So, yeah, it's been going on for a while. And what we have been doing, if this is new to your ears, what we've been doing is trying to align our sense of mission with Matthew 25, which is all about, it's a parable, it's another of those parables, but trying to find and see in our neighbors what those needs are and how we can see Jesus in them and care for our neighbors and our community. That's what Matthew 25 is all about. And so that's really why I want to talk to you all about what I'm going to say today. Figuring out, as I said on the cheat sheet, figuring out how we can do this, how we can care for neighbors' needs, and also what Ted and the Matthew 25 group has been doing is trying to discern what are those needs. You know, what are those needs in our neighborhood? And they're all over the place. So real quickly, what are some of the needs that have been clearly identified to date? Think about it. What are they? Some of them. And
single mother's poverty.
I'm sorry?
A single mother's poverty.
Poverty, especially for single moms, single parent households. Yep. Others?
Homeless.
I'm sorry, homelessness. Homelessness, thank you. What else?
Racism.
Racism. Mental health.
LGBTQ plus individuals and the needs of both youth and adults.
Yeah. Ted says. Yeah. Ted says we need to be welcoming and give God's grace to LGBTQ plus individuals and their families and friends, and make this a safe and welcoming space for that. What else?
Gun violence.
Gun violence. Yeah, there's violence. What else? There's hunger, right? And in poverty is part of. There's a lot of needs out there, and in some ways we need to be very sensitive about them and determining, given our mix of resources here, which is the time that we have to devote, the skills, and also our financial resources. What can we do? How do the two line up? Okay, how can we line up what God has given us and what the needs that are out there? Does that make sense? So this is one way to meet some of those needs, not all, some of those needs. Okay. I feel strongly that the church has neglected Christ's ministry of health and wholeness and healing in recent years. And that one way we can speak to this changing and new world out there is to be a place where we can be a part of that journey to healing and wholeness among people. Okay? So that's my thesis. So stick with me, okay? Stick with me. All right. Where do you get that? Why is that? Well, clearly from the scriptures, the Gospels, which record the ministry of Jesus, what he taught, what he did, what he said, how he interacted with people and brought them, reconnected them to God. So the scriptures, the ministry of Jesus, and then all of the great traditions and history of the church, what happened following Jesus with the apostles and all that sort of stuff, and we're going to go into that. But also, the scriptures, particularly Jesus, because remember, as Christians, we say that Jesus revealed to us the fullness of God, right? He was the one who revealed to us the true nature of God and what God values. And a part of his teaching is, frankly, his understanding of the Constitution, our humanness, what makes us human. Okay? Now, there are many among us in our modern scientific secular culture who believe firmly what? In terms of what we are or what we are not. What is that? There are many who believe that we are material biological beings, and that is it. That's it. Okay? That's it. Jesus taught clearly that we are more than that. That we are created in the image of God. Okay? We speak of God as having for us or manifestations of at least being triune, right? Triune. And that we see this reflected in our human constitution. So that we are, in fact, biology, we are material, we are a body, but what else are we?
Spirit.
Soul is spirit. You can use those interchangeably, right? And also, we're mind, we're consciousness, mind, emotions, which sometimes is the hardest thing to get out. You know, what is consciousness? What is that? So that we're more than just cells. Yes, we are that. We are a body, but we're also spirit, and we're also mind and emotion. So that's what our Christian tradition, that's a part of our great Christian tradition and theology. We want to begin there when it comes to healthcare and wholeness and caring for people. We approach it saying, we're not just a blob of cells. There's other things going on. And that those three different natures, they affect each other, right? They can act on each other. A sick mind can make the body sick. A sick body can really injure the mind. A really sick spirit can do all kinds of damage. But they interact. And so that a part of the goal of wholeness and healing is helping those three parts of our human person to work together more better. Okay? So I'm going to throw out my own definition of health and wholeness. And it's more than just saying my body is physically fit and I don't have any organic disease in my body. Okay? So this is my little definition there. You can see it. It's the optimal functioning and interaction of this triune image. All the while recognizing that what part of it inevitably gets sick, deteriorates, and dies? The body, right? So it's an optimal functioning. Now this challenges, if anybody has sat under Cheryl Buckley's teaching and read a couple of her books, you know that she talks a lot about the medical model of healthcare, which focuses on what? The getting rid of dis-ease in the physical body. Now, thank God that we have physicians that do that, but that approach is limited because there's other things working together to bring us wholeness and health. I have known people who have very sick bodies or unwell bodies or physically disabled bodies, and yet their spirits and their minds are just whole and beautiful and wonderful. A definition of being a well person doesn't necessarily mean I don't have bad knees or I have perfect, 20/20 vision, or etc. You can be well and whole and still have the challenge of aging bodies. And most of them in this room, looking back at me right now, including me, have some of those issues and more of them coming along, right? Okay, so that's my little definition of wholeness. That the church can play a part in seeking that kind of understanding of health and wholeness in the human person. Okay, so jumping down, I've jumped ahead of myself a little bit. So the Christian approach has been and was up until maybe the 1800s, the rise of science and the medical model. It was very important and they understood that these different parts of our human nature play on each other. We can make ourselves sick and not have an organic illness. Did you know that? That's called somatoform illness. We can literally make ourselves sick, and it can be a real thing, but it's no basis in biology, and that's a real thing. See it unfortunately, too much these days. Okay? So our approach will be the whole person. The biological body and the immaterial aspects of our nature, including the spiritual dimension, because unwellness in mind and spirit can affect the body and vice versa. Okay. So looking again at Jesus and his ministry, because he is our model, he is our guide, he is our teacher, he is our Lord. Can someone go grab me a glass of water? For some reason, all of a sudden I'm like, whoa. Okay, thanks. Preaching, teaching, and healing. Almost all scholars say that's what Jesus did. What did Jesus do? He preached the good news of God's grace to the people. He taught them with crazy parables that are hard to understand. And he healed people. He brought people into more wholeness with God. In fact, one scholar, Morton Kelsey, who's one of my favorite contemporary theologians, he's an Episcopalian, and this was his thing, was healing of mind, body, and spirit. He said, he outlines it in that book, he said that one-fifth, one-fifth of Jesus' ministry recorded in the four Gospels was all about bringing health and wholeness to bodies, minds, and spirits. So 20% of Jesus' activity in the four Gospels was in this whole area of healthcare, right? Who has a full cup.
No, I'm going to make it.
Perfect for spilling.
Put it on the community table. It's just furniture.
Sorry, disagree. Won't do that. Okay. Oops. Okay. So moving right along. Jesus, there is no doubt, even in secular minds, the Jesus of the Bible, of the New Testament, was a phenomenal healer. Now, why was that a problem? Why did he get in so much trouble for helping people to become well or become more whole? Why was that such an issue back then? See,
because it was tantamount to him forgiving sin. That was the guts underneath of that element.
right. Holly, what do you say?
Jesus looked down and said,
Yes, and he did some of his healing on the Sabbath day. He got lots of.
Touched unclean people.
He touched unclean people. All of that stuff was forbidden. Why? Because illness, sickness, whether it's in the body, mind, or spirit, was thought to be consequences for bad behavior. Even to the point of saying it was God's punishment. Illness, dis-ease was a punishment for sin. So healers, they would call them dark magicians. And healers were thought to be dark and malevolent because why? They were undoing what was thought to be God's will, right? And that's one reason why Jesus was in so much trouble all the time. He could do it. I personally think he did it in a number of different ways, but he could do it. And so people would say, well, he's got an evil spirit, as you know. He undoes God's will. And he helps people to get well. He helps sinners. He rubs elbows with sinners. So back then, today, we don't necessarily think that disease in the body or the mind is because we've done something wrong. Sometimes that's the case. We've made that, but sometimes it just happens.
Well, and also, we know that we are sinners as well.
Despite what's going on in our bodies, we know that to be true. We are imperfect. But that's not why we get sick. I don't believe.
Right.
I do not believe that. And I don't think Jesus believed it either.
I think that we don't judge other people as, because we know that we fall short too.
Exactly. Sure.
There are so many people out there though that still believe it's God's punishment.
They do. Oh, I can hear it. I can hear it in church people. Why is this happening to me? What did I do? And I want to go, you never listen to anything I've ever said. But it's a very common understanding. The first thing to do too is if I did something, this has happened to me because I did something. And Jesus had to confront the same thinking over and over again. No, it's not God's will for you. That's not why you're sick with this.
It kind of makes you wonder what kind of parenting causes a person to think like that.
Parenting.
Or really deeply embedded.
Or church help learning.
Or church.
Church parenting.
Yeah, church parenting, yeah. Richard Rohr says that our image of God is often based on our parents. What kind of parents they were. True. Okay, so Kelsey in his book says, if you look at all the 4 Gospels, there's a total of 72 healing stories. Some of those healing stories, it says things like many were healed, dozens were healed, or whatever. But he said basically, when you account for duplication, there's like 41 healing stories. Now, some of those healing stories are multiple healings going on, but there's basically 41 healings across the 4 Gospels. Does that make sense? Okay, so there's 41. So Jesus was busy doing some doctoring, right? He was busy. Okay. And Kelsey points out that includes the ministry of what some people call deliverance or even exorcism. Get comfortable with it, people. It's there. Okay. Another book that I love, that I found when I was a student at Princeton, was by Donald Capps, who's a professor of pastoral psychology, or was. I think he just died. Called Jesus the Village Psychiatrist. His thesis, and I think he's right, he said Jesus was an absolutely first-class, excellent first-century psychiatrist. That he understood human psychology before the whole discipline of psychology was ever even really understood. It's a fascinating book. And if you borrow it, you have to leave your name with me so I know where it is. All right, so moving right along. He recognized Jesus, so in that, Capps says, Jesus recognized the power, the absolute power of the mind to make one's body either well or unwhole. How many people have witnessed individuals, or maybe this has happened to you, where you know that a person made themselves sick? I've met several. It's true. And I've known people who, because of the power of their minds, their good outlook, their trust in a kind and gracious and merciful God, can be old as Methuselah. They're amazing. The power of the mind to influence the body. Jesus understood that. Okay. Any questions or thoughts so far? Okay, moving right along. Capps and others, and Morton Kelsey says that Jesus had a very, what came to be a very modern understanding of human personality. And that Jesus understood, in particular, somatoform illnesses. He understood, and this is all over the Gospels. Sick people who made themselves sick because of something that happened in their past. They were told that they were sinners, that they had done something bad, and they come down with all sorts of illnesses. And Jesus, what? Approaches them, speaks a word, often of grace and what? Forgiveness. Go on your way, you are forgiven. In other words, get over it, wipe it out. You're done with that. You're not to be punished anymore. And suddenly, almost in many cases, instantly, they are what? Made well. Think about that. Let your head spin a while. Jesus appeared to be very aware, cognizant, that human health, whether it's physical, mental, or spiritual, can be influenced also by unconscious psychic thoughts and spiritual realities. Carl Jung came upon this in the 30s and 40s and transformed the whole discipline of psychiatry. You can call it whatever you want, but they're there in people's heads. He helped people become conscious of these things. He addressed things like guilt and shame and forgiveness. Or and this is where the exorcism comes in, he identified and removed these unconscious elemental spirits, these psychoid things going on, and drove them out. But do you see where I underlined that? This is very important. And I stole this from somebody in one of those books. Jesus healed by intimate, personal contact, by caring. And he did it then with words and not always, but with words and with touch. Sometimes we know he used saliva. I didn't know this. Maybe you doctors of the church knew this. Did you know that saliva was a common form of medicine? That people, that healers would use, remember, and sometimes he would
Has
do it.
good enzymes.
I guess, but he would do it with mud. But I guess the thought was that there's some kind of healing capacity within human saliva. I never knew that until I read one of those books. That was new to me. Also, please know, as good a healer as Jesus was he able to heal everybody who around him who was unwell in some way? Many times in the Gospels it says Jesus could do no healings there because of their lack of trust. Now, the way I understand that is maybe they continue to believe that God executes judgment and punishment by way of illness. And if that's what you believe, and you will not entertain any other idea, that's the lack of trust. The lack of trust in a God of grace and mercy who wants us to come into wholeness. He could not do healings there because there was no faith, their lack of faith. Just wouldn't go there. Nope, that's not what I was told in Sunday school. I'm not going to think about it. That's the way I look at it. Okay? And then Morton Kelsey makes an important point. Now, Kelsey wrote his book back in the late 1990s. Back then he said, this is kind of scary, but this may be even more true. 1 American in 5, that's 20%, right? 20% will suffer from at least one recognized psychiatric disorder. Usually it's depression in any 6-month period. And those psychiatric disorders, those challenges, sometimes the challenge of the disorder comes from outside the person. You know, they experience some traumatic event of some kind or another. It could be divorce, suicide, the death of a very close loved one, whatever. But that's how prevalent it is. And my guess is it may be more than 20%, especially post-COVID. It's probably more than that. Steve.
Years ago, and maybe this man, I remember, but said that on any given Sunday, 40% of the people that come to church have been through a crisis this last week. Now, in my life, ministry, a crisis can be as big as the worst, you've just been told the worst kind of cancer, you've got the worst kind of cancer, and you've got 6 weeks, whatever. That's an immense crisis. All the way to crisis can be the washing machine broke.
Or your car broke down, which is a crisis for a lot of men.
Yeah. So what sets people off?
Yeah. So Steve's point is that, you know, maybe a near majority of people showing up in church on Sunday have journeyed into or through some sort of a jarring problem or challenge in their life. As Steve said, whether it's you've been told you've got terminal cancer, or there's something going on in your body, you don't know what it is, and it's really scary, or financial problems or a sick child or a kid that's in trouble, whatever it is. But we all have these issues, right? Very few people sail through life without any. I've only known like one or two people. Seriously. I've known one or two charming people.
They were in denial.
Either that or they just weren't fessing up. Joe.
What about those who don't acknowledge or respect the fact that they have a psychological problem, and I'm trying to think of the right word.
Hunky dories?
No.
Pollyanna's.
Delusion.
Yeah. That's, I think it's masochistic, that's not the word. Don't realize.
Narcissistic.
Narcissistic. That's it.
Well-
Don't realize or acknowledge.
There's plenty of people who really don't publicly acknowledge that they've got some kind of a emotional unwellness about them.
But don't you think there are people who were raised to think that were you to admit that, you would not be being a faithful Christian? So you can't be honest.
Yeah, you keep up the front.
Right.
The front, yeah.
You can't be vulnerable. You can't be needy.
Yeah.
I would think just the population of men in this country, how it
Well,
raised for
men.
decades. You weren't allowed to show emotion to your own kids and wives.
And Sean,
You know, I
how did men medicate
Yeah, how many bars are open?
bars? Talk,
That 20%, I mean, that's higher.
men who served in the wars, they full of trauma. I mean, the things that they witnessed and unimaginable. And many World War II vets that I've known will not talk about it. But many of them, including in my own family, whole history of primarily alcohol abuse. That's the way they medicated and dealt with their stuff. Yes.
Primary emotional caregivers in some communities.
Yeah. I said to the woman who cuts my hair, I got this, you hear all kinds of stories about issues. Oh, Jim. And I said, and you dare not tell this story. He goes, oh no, I would be implicated. And bartenders are the same way.
And they need
They
mental
hear
health
it.
training. They
Yeah.
should be trained.
They're really good listeners. They're skilled. They're really good. Maybe that's part of why they're good bartenders. I don't know. But yeah, they're really skilled. Sure.
Look how long it took for this government of the country to acknowledge PTSD. It wasn't
Right.
until after the Vietnam War.
Right. Yeah,
It's
PTSD.
still so prevalent trying to deal with it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's out there, right? It's out there.
So how do we learn to be that kind of welcoming community? That's the point.
Yeah.
Well,
Hold your fire.
and
Yes.
I will say, I think there's a generational difference. I see among people our kids' ages, or their mid to late 20s. Those folks talk pretty openly about depression and anxiety. And I think when I was in college, people were not doing that. When they were in college, people were. And I was just sitting talking to a couple of younger folks the other day, and they were saying it's not taboo to talk about mental health issues that you carry with you.
Yeah.
Whereas it
And
used to
I
be-
agree, because, I mean, when I was a kid, those things were just not a topic of discussion. If you had any of those sad feelings, you just put on a smile and went on your way. Yeah, right. So that's, the culture is changing. So real quickly, and I'll blast this and then we're going to get to Cinda's point there. So real quickly, Christ's ministry of healing and wholeness, it began with him, of course, but then it continued in church history. In the apostolic age, remember Jesus sent the disciples out, and he said to them, go preach the good news and heal the sick. Feed the hungry and brothers, but one of those things was take care of people who aren't well. Continue this, because it's not God's will for them to be sick and unwell. God's will is for them to come into wholeness. That doesn't mean we're all going to be perfectly healthy throughout our lives. Most of us are not. But Do the best you can to bring it into an optimal functioning of the three. Do your very best. And he sent them out to do it. And he said, greater things will you do than what I've done. Greater could mean in more numbers, simply because there's more of you, but we're supposed to do this. The book of Acts is just full of healing stories. The book of Acts is one of the best books in the Bible. But there's 19 healing stories in the book of Acts alone. And then that strange little book that some people think should not be in the Bible, like, for example, John Calvin and Martin Luther, the book of James, the letter of James, they think that that was the origin of the Christian rite of healing. In the 5th chapter of James, it says, is any sick among you? Then call for the elders of the church and let them anoint you with oil and pray for you. They think that was the origin of that. And then, of course, the church fathers, they expanded not only the physical, attention to the physical healing, but also to spiritual wellness. And modern scholars think that that's the origin of the Enneagram. That the Enneagram goes all the way back to the church fathers. Remember, we've done some of that work where they say there's basically 9 compulsions that drive people. 9 things that drive people, human behavior. And there's a good side to it and there's a bad side to it. The thing you got to first do is recognize what drives you. I do this with couples that in marriage preparation, and they go at it like scared, but then I see tears because it works. It's accurate. And then they recognize, yes, Jim, that's exactly what I do, and I don't want to do it that way. And I go, the good news is you're young. I didn't figure it out until I was like 45. Don't wait that long. So they started to, in other words, address the personality and psychology and the spiritual directing and helping people to figure out what's driving them. Because what's driving you in your mind, in your spirit, will have an effect on your physical body. Okay, so moving right along then. In the Middle Ages, remember after the fall of Rome, the church, because the church was a part of the empire, everything started to come apart at the seams. And the Pope at the time, whose name I can't remember, anyway, it doesn't matter. The Pope at the time, or the Bishop of Rome at the time, who was the head of the church, decided that, well, somebody's got to preserve all this good stuff, the scriptures, the traditions, the creeds, all the good stuff, or it's going to get lost. And so they set up these monastic communities, small religious communities of men and women. And inside those monastic communities, they continued, they became places of healing and wholeness. They continued Christ's ministry of healing there. And then, slowly but surely, there was the rise of science and the scientific method and discovering, the earth isn't flat, by the way, the sun doesn't revolve around the earth, and all those great discoveries, and then finally medical science and all of that. The church started to shy away, I think, from at least the care of the body. What the church did do, and this is true of all the major Protestant denominations, and it's true of the Catholic Church as well. So we built hospitals, which is great. But slowly but surely, the clergy and the elders were sent on their way because they were not the medical professionals. And what was taking place in the medical facilities, the hospitals that the church has established, was basically care of the body and the whole medical model of we'll do anything to preserve your life even if you're near death. We'll do everything, we'll run every test we can to try to keep you alive. And often not addressing the spiritual and emotional needs. Another cool thing that started to happen in these monastic communities is they also set up hospices. Places where people without families or means could go and they were sort of like they were like nursing homes, but what they really were hospices because you just usually didn't get well, you just died, but they would take care of you. Okay, so but that's still care and wholeness, helping you to be as whole as you can as you journey into death and eternal life. Okay? And then there was the rise of pastoral psychology in the 60s and 70s and 80s in seminaries. Suddenly we started to realize that what's going on with the mind and the spirit is really important. And the church started to take it back. They learned from the secular psychologists aspects of the human personality and mental illness, et cetera, and realizing that the church, the clergy, and other pastoral caregivers can have a really great and helpful effect with those issues. In fact, like at Fuller, where Cinda went, there's a whole school of psychology. And some of the greatest pastoral psychologists have come out of that school and others. My seminary, we didn't focus too much on that. We had some pastoral care, but now you'll see it very prevalent in almost all seminaries as we're starting to take it back and do it from a perspective of faith. Education. I didn't go through CPE, didn't have to, didn't do it. That is where clergy go for like 3 months. Usually it's in the summer before their senior year of seminary, and they go into usually a hospital setting, not always, but usually a hospital setting, and they become, in hospitals where they're welcome, and they become a part of the healing team. They learn how to care for people and the emotions and those sorts of things as people approach surgery or whatever. Really wonderful stuff.
Steve got CPE, but I was 5 years earlier and I didn't get CPE, so there's a difference right there.
Yeah. In my seminary, when I went through, it wasn't required. It really, and all I wanted to do was get out. So anyway, okay. So slowly there's been a reawakening, a refreshment, an understanding that the church, Christianity, must carry on Christ's ministry of healing in many different ways and manifestations. Okay, it's happening, and I personally think it's really, really super exciting. So, given all that, how might this be manifesting or might manifest here at Lakewood Presbyterian? As we look into this new mission thing, as we try to align ourselves with the values and principles of Matthew 25. Get some ideas? I do. Sumana.
Just to say, once upon a time had a healing ministry.
Yep, we sure did. We sure did. And there's nothing to say we can't.
It wasn't well supported.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. We weren't. I just don't think we were ready to talk about it. It's amazing to me now that I've been here almost 22 years. We're getting ready to talk about it. I've waited a long time. Okay. But Subhana's right, and we had a healing ministry, and people did come to us for it. Yeah.
I think you could bring back the board of deacons for a start.
What?
Bring back the board of deacons.
Holly?
There was a Sister Monica, and I got a healing and full healing from depression. There was Reverend Ainsley's, and I got a healing out there from a car accident. Now I'm in need of healing again. I'd like to be able to walk better.
Yeah. Healing and wholeness is often a long journey. It is. Bert?
I just agree. In the past, the healing ministry maybe Savannah was referring to is the Stephen Ministry Program. We had that for many years.
Yeah, that was another manifestation of pastoral care and concern and helping people. Often as they came out of the loss of a loved one, and there's this journey. There's always a journey of healing. It's rarely instantaneous, especially with emotional stuff.
One more thing.
Add to that, the parish nurse we had.
Yeah, she was phenomenal. Yeah.
So is anybody writing this down? I don't
Being recorded.
Digitally, Holly, what?
It was Sister Monica, and she used to have the crucifix, the cross. And also, I went to confession before I got my miracle, because I was fighting with my mother. I said, how long do I got to obey my mother? And the priest said, well, when you're with your mother, curl your hair, put your hair in those, or a nice dress. But when you're not with her, to wear your blue jeans with holes in them and you can not comb your hair and.
So the point is, again, the underlying, intimate, personal contact, build relationships. Steve, I think you had your hand there.
Before, a couple of churches ago, before there was the Stephen ministry, or at least as big as it has come across the country, I tried to establish little triangles where people would confide in the needs they had. And there were people who said, I've had that experience, breast cancer, I've been through a divorce, I've been through this kind of pancreatic cancer, whatever it was. And I'm willing to talk to somebody about it. Then when people said they had hurts, I said, I'm not going to stop talking to you, but would you be willing to visit with someone who's walking, even their moccasins?
Perfect.
And that created a wonderful kind of friendships in the church with people who had just a lot of that confidentiality, but it did wonderful things in time lives together.
Steve's my point exactly. Intimate, personal contact and support of people who are on similar journeys back into wellness. What was one of the first groups that did this? It's a model for everything. Alcoholics Anonymous, where people who have the same issue come together, speak honestly about what's going on with them, and then they become accountable to one another, and miracles happen. And then from AA came other 12-step groups. Here at this church, we've got 2 phenomenal Al-Anon groups. Now, Al-Anon groups are for people whose loved ones are in some sort of an addicting situation, alcohol, drugs, maybe
There's also
both.
Alateens.
And there's Alateens. We don't have an Alateen group, but Alateens. So, as Steve said, when you can connect people who, the whole idea of the wounded healer thing, where people who are on that similar journey, or people who have been on it, can provide encouragement and guidance, maybe a little foresight or insight into some of the dynamics that are present, can come together in small groups, and from a perspective of faith, and bring that journey of wholeness, not necessarily cures, but healing. And healing is not the same thing as a cure. Okay? But bring people into those journeys of wellness and wholeness over time. I've seen it work really well. And that is, so my point of all this underhanded talk is to say, I think that one manifestation of caring for neighbors in needs is trying to more fully develop this ministry to our community based on small groups. And some of them have already been suggested. We've already got Al-Anon here. The Lakewood Black Caucus is going to be joining us very soon. Now, you'll say, well, that's racism. Well, no. Their support group right now is trying to help one another live together in community in a place that's primarily white. And all the dynamics that go with that. And then maybe expanding that. That's coming into the church here in the next month or 2. I personally want to start a suicide bereavement support group because that's my expertise. Steve has talked about grandparents raising grandchildren. Steve and Cinda did that. They've got experience. Do you know how many grandparents are raising grandparents? A lot.
More than ever now.
What about, and Steve and Cinda brought this up, what about people caring for loved ones with dementia or Alzheimer's? Do you know how many people are caring for, Beth, you walked that horrible path.
I was going to mention that one, Alzheimer's support groups. I would implore anyone, Alzheimer's isn't just the patient, it is a family disease.
It's usually harder on the family than the patient.
It's a family disease, and unless you can come together and fight together, because there is no cure.
Right.
But for those that have to deal with it, you need each other.
And being in those groups with people walking that similar path is life transforming.
It's like AA.
But I think if you do that, and this is getting into the weeds a little bit, when we did that in Cincinnati, our problem was we needed another room where the person with dementia, Alzheimer's, could be while that caregiver was in the group.
Yeah.
Because you can't just go off and leave.
Right, but the point is
Yes,
that
it's complicated.
the needs out there are not just hunger and homelessness. They're there, absolutely. There's all these other needs that are really manifesting in our neighbors. Emily?
I can remember when the deacons in this church used to visit everybody in the church 4 times a year. They took them a communion card and wanted to visit. So everybody in the church got 4 visits a year from a deacon. Now, you couldn't visit everybody in the church 4 times a year, of course.
Because I never get anything done other than that.
But the point is, if they would see a crisis, then they could tell you. But everybody in the church got a visit 4 times a year from a deacon. And I can remember having them come to visit us, and Rob would go and visit other people, but it was a wonderful program.
But perhaps the thing that makes the difference is the underlying intimate and personal contact. I saw another hand somewhere. Joe?
No one has mentioned the LGBTQ plus. I feel is a thread through all of this. I'm looking forward to setting aside some kind of a program here for that specifically, for young people and for the families, but also for us to acknowledge that sexual identity is true with homeless, it's true in the Black community.
Yeah, cuts across it all.
It does. And that's just something that we don't need to be ashamed of, but we need to acknowledge it and help where we can.
Okay, because it's 10 minutes after 12, and I know you're all looking at me like, Jim. So, good discussion. We're on this journey together. You're going to be hearing more. Watch the newsletter. You're going to see an article in the October newsletter about where we are and what we're getting ready to do. So, thank you all. This was super duper exciting for me anyway. I don't know about you, but